I was just noticing, I was telling Rob when we came in, this was not here, this was from a previous meeting at NCAE, but when I first saw it, lack of support, unreasonable, stressful atmosphere, I thought it was a Diener workshop. But we're thrilled you're here. We're thrilled we have Pricey Harrison and Amy Adams here to talk about what happened and now what should happen. And I was also interested that Governor McCrory recently received a headline, you probably saw it in the News and Observer, that said, McCrory, move ash ponds. Yesterday, Secretary Scavarla, who lives in Pinehurst, was talking to the pilot in Southern Pines and was explaining how it's really a lot more complicated, and he's not sure what we could get a judge to do, and this is a very complicated process. So it seems that the headlines and the governor's rhetoric are way ahead of, at least this point, what the Secretary thinks we ought to do. But that's why we have the experts here to tell us, to introduce them and tell you a little bit more about it. Rob Schofield with NC Policy Watch.
Again, thank you all very much for being here. We're delighted to have such a nice turnout. Thanks to our speakers. I'm going to introduce our speakers and talk about today's event. I want to first, however, make you aware of a couple of other events that are upcoming. Next week, there's going to be a protest related to this subject, and Katie Munger, who works at Progress NC. Where'd Katie go? There she is. Katie wants to.
Hey everybody, I'm part of a coalition of environmental, social justice, and good government groups. We've come together to sponsor a big rally next Wednesday, March 5th. We're starting gathering around 4:45 p.m. At 5 p.m. we're going to have a press conference with Bob Hall of Democracy North Carolina to address the financial prize. We're going to have some environmental people there as well. We're asking people to wear blue to symbolize the river, and it's going to be a river of accountability. We have 3 asks to the rally on Wednesday. 1, to call on Governor McCrory to immediately clean up our water supply, particularly the Dan River. 2, to require that Duke Energy immediately clean up their coal ash lagoons at no cost to taxpayers or ratepayers. And 3, for McCrory and members of his administration to disclose all financial ties to Duke Energy immediately.
That's March 5th, right?
March 5th. And our feelings about that last is that he can make all the environmental statements he wants. But until we know what financial interests he has in Duke Energy, nothing can be trusted.
And the location again?
Oh, the location, thank you. The location is across from the Governor's Mansion at 200 North Blunt Street in Raleigh. So it's Wednesday, March 5th, 4:45 p.m. Wear blue across from the Governor's Mansion in Raleigh.
Is that a clean?
Thanks, Steve.
It's a Come Clean McCrory rally.
Bottled water.
And another event I want to make you aware of is that on April 22nd, our parent organization, the North Carolina Justice Center, will host its annual Defenders of Justice Awards. That'll be at the Friday Center in Chapel Hill. You should mark your calendars. The details, it's April 22nd, details will be announced, and the award recipients will be announced next week, so stay tuned for that. So on to our event for today, which we've entitled Duke's Dan River Coal Ash Disaster. What happened? How big is the problem? What's next? You know, for thousands of years, humans have found it difficult to live without coal, this cheap, combustible, sedimentary rock. They've burned it to stay warm and for transportation, and in recent decades to produce much of the electricity on which modern society depends. But of course, even from the beginning, people knew they were dealing with nasty and harmful stuff. Today, coal combustion endangers human health and well-being via the production of vast quantities of greenhouse gases that promote global warming. It also injects immense amounts of toxins into the atmosphere that ultimately settle out of the air, or into the air that we breathe and into the water that we consume and food we consume. And of course, this is not even to mention the amazingly destructive process that we go about in getting the stuff out of the ground. And of course, that's not the end of it. Once you burn the stuff and hopefully use modern technology to scrub some of the exhaust flowing up the smokestack, you're still left with another mess, the byproduct of the combustion process. And in the United States, coal combustion produces nearly 140 million tons of waste, or fly ash, scrubber sludge sometimes referred to, and other combustion byproducts each year. These byproducts remain near to or on the site of coal-fired power plants, sort of like an especially vile version of leftovers in your fireplace. And of course, a few weeks ago, several thousand tons of this stuff under the control of Duke Energy spilled into the Dan River in Eden, North Carolina, and it's now gone 80 miles?
80 miles.
80 miles down the river. And as North Carolina comes to terms with this disaster, several questions arise. What happened? How bad are things? Where else might this happen? What could and should be done? So today we're delighted to have two incredibly knowledgeable speakers. We've got Amy Adams. Many of you have seen the picture online of a hand coming out of the river with a bunch of sludge on it. That's Amy's hand. Amy spent her career, she's the campaign coordinator for the group Appalachian Voices, and she was raised in eastern North Carolina. Appalachian Voices is, of course, in Boone. She spent her career in public service for environmental protection. She earned a BS in biology and an MA in environmental science education at ECU. She spent 3 summers researching sharks in the Bahamas, which has no doubt prepared her for public policy work. And she served as an outreach specialist for the Center for Applied Aquatic Ecology before joining the Department of Environment and Natural Resources in 2004. And over the next decade, she steadily rose in the ranks to become regional office supervisor for Diener's Washington region, encompassing the coastal plains of North Carolina. And last year, she left Diener to join Appalachian Voices, which is an award-winning environmental nonprofit committed to protecting the land, air, and water of the central and southern Appalachian region. And the group focuses on reducing coal's impact on the region and advancing a vision for a cleaner energy future. And of course, Representative Pricey Harrison, there's a hand story for Representative Harrison as well, who unfortunately had a run-in with her neighbor's dog yesterday. Was it yesterday?
No, 2 days ago.
2 days ago. So she's had to have a little surgery on her hand and is playing in pain today. We really appreciate her coming despite being in some discomfort. But she needs no introduction to progressives in North Carolina. She's your 5th term in the North Carolina House of Representatives from Guilford County. She received her bachelor's degree at Duke and her JD at UNC Chapel Hill. And like Amy, she's from North Carolina and spent much of her adult life working to preserve our natural environment. And prior to her election to office, she spent many years as a communications law attorney and then as an environmental advocate, activist, and lobbyist. And during her tenure in the State House, she's received awards from dozens of organizations and nonprofit civic groups and quickly developed into one of the state's most passionate and articulate voices for progressive policy change in an array of issues. But it's undoubtedly in her work in the field of environmental protection, an area in which she has chaired committees and sponsored numerous important bills, that Pricey is best known. And that's why she's here today as a true expert on the subject of coal ash and the policy environment surrounding our treatment of this problematic substance. She's been telling us for years we need to do something about it, and we need to hear from her today. We're going to begin with Amy, who's got some slides to share with us, actually of the disaster that I'll sort of be scrolling through during her talk. But without further ado, please welcome Amy Adams.
I am going to have to apologize up front to everybody who wants me to stand right in front of this podium, because I am physically incapable of standing in one spot for very long.
That microphone is detachable if you need to.
Excellent. Well, I have a really big voice. So I just wanted to start, because most people in the room are at least associate or know a little bit of background information about coal ash. I just want to start with some numbers, because these are some pretty impressive numbers. About 50,000 tons. The numbers have changed, but we'll pick that middle of the road number. That's the amount of tons of coal ash that were spilled. How many Olympic-sized swimming pools would that be? Somewhere around 20 to 25. How many rail cars would that be? Somewhere around 450. Now, that doesn't include the 27 million gallons of ashy water that were discharged in addition to the coal ash. Rank among U.S. spills of coal ash, this one's number 3. Hours that Duke waited to report the spill to the public, 26. Miles downstream to the first drinking water source, this number's bounced around. I've seen 6, I've seen 23. Apparently the difference is it's 6 miles by the crow flies, it's 23 river miles, the way that the river bends around. The age of Duke Energy's river ash pits, its average age 53 years old. When the EPA first found problems at the Dan River plant, 2009. Number of coal ash plants across all of North Carolina, 14. Number of those plants that have unpermitted discharges and groundwater contamination, 100%. There is a community in outside of Wilmington called Fleming. The amount that Duke is going to have to spend to run municipal water because they've contaminated the groundwater supply, $2.25 million. The cost to the local economy and the local community that's going to come out of their pocket, $472,000. Number of times someone living near a coal ash pit is to develop cancer as compared to someone who smokes a pack a day. 9 times. It's safer to smoke a pack a day than it is just to live near one of these darn things. The year in which the EPA administrator first pledged that she would take action on coal ash, 2009. The year in which public health and advocacy groups sued the EPA on the promise to get those coal ash rules, 2012. The amount Duke Energy spent last year alone in efforts to block coal ash regulations, almost $6 million. In fact, their projected estimates on what it will cost to clean up the coal ash basins over the next 10 years are between 4.5 and 5 billion. Well, they spent $6 million just in lobbying efforts last year alone, so that number doesn't really sound all that dramatic for cleanup. Date on which the Department of Justice lodged a consent decree that said the EPA is going to release coal ash rules, and that is the end of this year, December 19th. Now here's another really interesting fact that I found that I thought was pretty impressive. The EPA estimates that the storage capacity for all existing coal ash ponds and landfills is approximately 864,000 acre feet. To put that in perspective, that is enough coal ash to flow continuously over Niagara Falls for 4 days straight. That is a pretty big amount of coal ash that we're dealing with. It is the second largest industrial stream in the United States, second only to mining waste.
Do you want me to move these slides?
No, we'll start right there.
Oh, okay.
We'll start right there. And I apologize, that's all the planned speaking I have. I'm just going to shoot from the hip from here. On February 2nd, and to me this is sort of where the start of the miscommunication breakdown occurred. There was a phone call from Duke Energy to the emergency management folks at 6:40 that evening. And there's what they call an EM4. It's sort of an emergency, something's happened checklist that operators talk to the person on the phone. They ask them the questions, they go through the checkbox. And some of the important questions to clue in emergency management is do they scramble a team, or do they wait for Monday morning and just let Diener know? Are these questions. How much spilled? Don't know. Is it a drinking water source? Not there. Have you seen a fish kill? Nope. Now, had the operator that was on the other end of the line with emergency management said, I don't know, but it's a lot. Or, no, it's not a drinking source there, but a few miles downstream there is, we might have had a faster, different reaction. But this was what started it, and this is sort of where the first breakdown of communication happened. We never got a really good picture from day one, from hour one, as to what exactly had happened. So this was on the evening of February 2nd. We got there on February 3rd, about 24 hours later, and this was what we found outside of Danville, Virginia. This is right outside the water intake plant. This was also, if you go to the next one, this was also, it's a little hard to see with all the bright lights, but you can see it's from shore to shore, the entire, as far as Danville at that point, the entire river was milky, milky gray. So we wrapped up about 2 a.m. On Wednesday morning, and then here we were Wednesday morning actually getting out on the boats and trying to get an assessment in daylight of what it looked like. This is actually, I'm in one of those boats. This was right at the discharge site, and you can tell that where the discharge was, this coal ash sludge was hanging to the bank for a little bit. And so there was this really distinctive line. I mean, we were paddling, and I asked, well, how will we know when we get to it? Boy, did I know when I got to it. It was pretty obvious. And so this is, I think I have another aerial. So this is what it looked like to be in the plume. This was just downstream of the pipe. This is what it looked like to be in the plume from the air. and if we switch to the next one, this is what it looked like to be in the water with it. It was not homogeneous, like the whole river wasn't the same color gray. You could look down and you would actually just see it boiling up from the bottom. I mean, it was rolling and boiling. If you've ever looked at really hot miso soup, you know, the way that it boils, that's kind of what the Dan River looked like at that point. You know, we can just start flipping through. Just, I have nothing in particular. I just wanted to show you guys some of these pictures you may have seen online with Associated Press or other news sources. A lot of these are ones that were taken by river keepers or Appalachian Voices that you may not have seen in the news. So I just wanted to share some of these with you. This is sediment samples. The one on the left, sorry, I never learned my left from my right. The one on the left is before the spill. So that's, the Dan River is a sediment heavy river. It always looks very turbid. And it's because it has a lot of flow rate to it. It's kind of flashy. So it always kind of looks murky. But it went from murky brown to gray black. So these were actually sediment samples that we had pulled from the river. Let's see what else we got going on, honey. That is the Dan River, Danville water intake that you see there on the side. And what you see floating on the top, what you saw in the Dan River, it's not like it's just coal ash, and coal ash is this one thing. There's lots of different types of coal ash in these pits. There's flue gas, there's fly ash, there's boiler slag, there's bottom ash, and the stuff that's floating on the top, interestingly enough, I learned this from a Duke official who said, "Do you know what you're looking at?" And I said, "No, why don't you tell me?" So he started explaining to me that the white stuff on the top is actually called spinospheres. It comes from, during the heating process in the flue, there's actually a silicon crystal, like a sand chamber on the bottom. And when that heats up, some of what it will do is form a little capsule, a little perfectly round, minuscule capsule around these contaminants in like a little bead of glass. And so that stuff floats on the top. So what you're seeing is multiple types of ash that settled out in different types. The boiler slag and the bottom ash is heavier and it's grittier, so that's the kind of stuff that we're seeing closer to the discharge. When we got here to Danville, what we were seeing was a much finer ash, and we were seeing a lot of the fly ash that was floating on top that had made it. Again, it's just, I'm sure everybody's seen the picture of the plant. You know, the spill at Dan River was a visible spill like Kingston. It was what we can see outwardly. It's what the public can go, hey, there's something pouring into my river, turning my entire river gray. I'm now scared for the fish. I'm scared to drink it. But these ponds are much more insidious just as they sit. Even without this break, even without this pipe leak, that pond has been sitting and contaminating groundwater for years. Not only does it leach through the groundwater into the bottom, but these things are also designed by engineers. I guess we could call it, there are designed felonies and there are undesigned felonies, because these things are violating the Clean Water Act with their seeps. So there are designed seeps that are meant to alleviate the pressure, the back pressure on the berm. And then there are these unpermitted seeps where the pressure isn't being released enough in one particular location, and so it's seeping out at different locations along the berm. Now, we have since found out with Dan River, not only did we have the 48-inch pipe, we have a 36-inch pipe that's underneath. We have the permitted NPDES discharge location upstream close to the plant, where you can see in the far background where the head wall dam is. There is another unpermitted seep. Now, seeps range in a big way from, if you go and look at the seeps, for example, at the Lee plant in Goldsboro, their seeps are literally just kind of squishy wet spots that always stay wet. Dan's seep is a cascade that has turned all the rocks orange. And you've heard folks say all of the orange is a natural bacteria. That's true. But the only reason those bacteria are there on those rocks is because we've had a prolonged discharge at that seep location that's allowed that bacteria to grow up. So yes, the bacteria is natural, but it's not in a natural location. It had to have that enriched seep coming out. And like I said, this isn't oozing out, it's not a wet spot, it's cascading down the rocks, kind of like a waterfall. So there are those 4 locations. And as of this morning, I was told by Waterkeepers Alliance that there are seeps on the backside, just off the edge of this picture. There is a small tributary to the Dan. There are multiple small seeps along that berm as well, and their tests have come back that show that the water that's coming out of that tributary also appears to have elevated numbers of arsenic and selenium, iron, and manganese. So this thing is a leaking mess all over the place. It's leaking into the ground, it's leaking out the sides, it's discharging out old pipes that were left in place. So this thing really is kind of just a big leaky mess. And this is indicative, I mean, this is not a rare example. It's not like, well, we have one really bad coal ash plant here along the dam. They're all doing this. The Lewis Creek killed off 9 of 10 species in the 70s, and we still don't have it completely back. Lake Sutton down in Wilmington, it's killed off thousands of fish species. And the scary part about that is the lake at Lake Sutton is used as a fishery, is advertised as a fishery, and there's a lot of subsistence fishing. A lot of the Hispanic community there actually fishes food for subsistence out of that lake, which is poisoned with selenium and has 2-headed deformed fish. I keep thinking about putting together one of those cute little internet memes of like the 1950s lady that says, "Oh honey, it tastes fine, just cut the extra tail off." I haven't gotten to my comms team with that one yet. So we did a lot of sampling. We went above the river or above the discharge and below the discharge, and our samples have come back. We did find elevated levels of arsenic. Our selenium samples just came back this week, and we have found elevated levels of selenium below the discharge point and all the way down to Danville. Now, Danville still says, and we have no reason to doubt them, that their water treatment plant is capable of treating this, and that the water out of that intake is still safe for human consumption. Well, that may make you feel better if you're a resident in Danville, that you can turn on your tap, that somehow the infrastructure can do it. But when you're also standing by the river and you're looking at a do not get in the water, do not touch the water, do not eat anything out of the water, it's hard to reconcile those two things in your head. And so the folks in Danville are kind of struggling. We can't get in it, we can't swim in it, we can't touch it, we can't eat anything from it, but they say it's okay for me to drink. So that's a difficult pill to swallow. But unfortunately, we're scientists, we have to run on the data. The data says that it's safe to drink, so public is still drinking that water. There's my hand. I had to get it in there at least once. And somebody asked me in one of my interviews, they said, why would you do that? You better than anybody knows what is in that coal ash. And I said, well, I think my instincts for scientific investigation overtook my instincts for self-preservation. Because when I got there, this is the platform that's just below the Dan River, or the Danville intake, their raw water intake. And this log was floating, and I pulled it up, and like the whole log just looked like it was running. And so my first instinct was to go, how much is here, and what is this? And well, thank goodness I did, because that handprint has been the hand seen around the world. I keep joking with my husband that I'm going to have to walk around like this for the rest of my life so people know who I am. But by the time you got to Danville, this stuff was so fine, such suspended particles, that it was literally coating every branch, every floating log, all along the sides. It was coated in this very fine coal ash particles. Like I said, this is not the heavy stuff at this point. The heavier stuff had already dropped out. And we've learned from U.S. Fish and Wildlife that there are approximately 2 sort of sandbars underneath the water that in some places are as much as 5 feet deep. Of course, that doesn't stretch the entire 80 miles of contamination. It of course gets smaller and smaller as it goes. But one of the things that's causing this particular river for it to spread so far is we've got a lot of these low headwall dams. And so every time it goes over a dam, it gets resuspended, and is able to travel again. It gets resuspended over the next dam and travels farther. So it has made it all the way to Cart at this point. It is 80 miles. They did start this week trying to vacuum out some of the sediment that's closest to the discharge pipe, because that's of course where it's the thickest. But there's a couple of problems going on with that, and there are kind of two camps right now. Is do we continue pushing to get as much out as quickly as possible? What's happening now is that we've had some rain, we've had some water. Like I said, this is a very sediment-laden river to start with, and now it's starting to lay additional natural sediment deposition on top of this coal ash. And the flow of the river is making it difficult for them to get in there and safely work. So they're kind of back at the drawing board. They've removed a very small fraction. They're not getting the success right now with the hydraulic dredge that they had hoped. Like I said, part of it's flow of the river. It's dangerous to stand out there with a big giant vacuum cleaner and try and vacuum out the bottom of the river. And then again, like I said, we're getting now sediment laying down on top of this coal ash underneath. And basically that does the same thing as if we capped, you've heard folks talk about, well, we'll just cap them in place. Well, there's no liner underneath it, so capping it in place is, my analogy is like if you have a backyard full of trash and you decide, well, my neighbors are coming over, instead of moving the trash, I'm just going to throw a tarp across it, they won't notice. That's kind of what cap in place does for a coal ash pond. Without a liner, capping it in place and covering it with dirt and making grass grow on it does not remove the pollution source, it just makes the pollution source look pretty. And it's out of sight, out of mind. It makes it look like a nice green field. So one of the things that we've noticed with the samples of ash, and if you want to just kind of flip through, yeah, that's where it went over the dam at Danville. One of the problems that we're seeing with this coal ash is where we've taken big sediments out, sediment samples to evaluate it, is we've noticed that as our sediment samples are drying out, they're getting really rock hard, which means, you know, one, thank goodness it's in the river where it's getting a water source, but it means especially on the banks when the river goes down, it's going to act as a pavement. Because it will dry out, and it is, I mean, it's used for concrete for a reason. It does make a good filler, it does solidify, and so now we're facing the issue of this coal ash basically paving the bottom and completely eliminating all forms of life in what they call the hyporetic zone, which is the living zone of the river. So we're struggling now as scientists to say, do we just go in there full steam ahead and try and vacuum it all up before we get any more sediment? Is there a certain amount that the river can assimilate? My vote is no. My vote has been get it out, get it out, get it out yesterday. Because what we noticed in the 2008 spill in Kingston, even though they did get a lot of it out, is that what happens to anything that's left on the bottom is what they call pour water. So the bottom of the river sits, and then you have this layer of coal ash, and the water stays in the coal ash so that the coal ash stays at a different consistency than the bottom of the river. And so when it heats up, when you get anoxic conditions and the river gets hot, what has been happening in Tennessee is you get this sort of bubbling up of that coal ash, and it's bringing up arsenic and selenium with it, resuspending it in the water column, up and down the river periodically throughout the warm summer months. So that's what we could be potentially facing here if we don't get it out. Now I've been asked a bunch of times, well, how did this happen and where were the failures? I think one failure that we had was on the federal level. EPA has failed to put forth coal residual ash storage regulations. They first thought about it in 2000. They promised again in 2009 after the coal ash spill or the dam break in the Kingston, Tennessee. And then there was a lot of delay with the office, with OMB. There was a lot of delays with proposed regulations that would stop federal oversight and leave it to the states. So there was a lot of stuff going on in the background, and so we wound up in 2014. We still have states trying to regulate this independently, and clearly we're not doing a great job. In North Carolina, I will say we're ahead of the curve. We are ahead of the curve in North Carolina because at least we do not allow them to be put in the groundwater table. There are states that allow these things unlined to sit inside the groundwater table. And there are states that do not require any sort of groundwater monitoring either around their landfills or their coal ash ponds. We've been monitoring in North Carolina. We know all 14 of ours are leaking. So there's states in the southeast that have a problem. They don't even know how big it is. So at least we are in North Carolina, we are ahead of the curve. But there are a lot of decisions that I think we could have made better if we could start it over. I think we would have EPA have regulations in place. We could have had the state agency step up and be a leader. They have failed to do that. And we've had Duke themselves who could have stepped up and said, yep, we messed up, we know it, we learned from what happened in South Carolina. We're going to come up with a plan to start moving these things. But at no point along the line did EPA step up, did the state step up, or did Duke step up. So now we've got the third largest environmental disaster sitting on the Dan River, which is a recreational river. It runs through a couple of counties that have high poverty and low income rates, and we've got a mess on our hands. And so now we're pushing really hard, yet again, to have these coal ash ponds reevaluated by the state and by Duke, and move them. As long as they sit there, they're a pollution source. It doesn't matter how much grass you put on top of it. Until you remove it, none of the plants in North Carolina have composite liners. So every single one of them comes in direct contact with the groundwater. And last night I was just, because I'm a strange person and I think reading statistics on coal ash ponds at 11 o'clock at night is a fun thing to do. I started looking at a couple of the plants' actual groundwatering well data. And there were a couple of wells, I just happened to pull up the one in Lee, and there were a couple of wells that every single number was off the chart. It was above standards for that particular well. And I went back and looked at, well, what was the separation from the groundwater table? And that was the difference at that well. The separation from the groundwater table at well number 6 was 6 to 7 feet. It was 14 to 18 feet at some of the other wells that were higher up. So we know that anytime it's close to the groundwater table, we do run into a risk of it leaching. Every site's a little different. It depends on the soils that are underneath it. It depends on the topography. It depends on the lay of the land and the way the water runs and fractures. But in general, the closer that these things are to the water table, the more of a risk they pose. In the same way, the closer they are to the surface water, and if water flows downhill, the closer they are to the surface water, that water is going to want to go to through the berm into that surface water. So all 14 of ours are set up basically to pollute our rivers and to pollute our groundwater. And we've got to get organized, and we have been getting organized. We were at Duke on Tuesday in front of the headquarters with 9,000 signatures from customers across the state that said this is not an acceptable, this is outdated. 53 years ago, when the majority of this fleet was put in, it was the best we knew to do. I'm not saying that anybody made a bad decision. We didn't have the information then. After 53 years of contamination and listening to stories and seeing folks with deformed fingers, and I've been in Ballew's Creek and I've been in Belmont, and you can almost ask those folks, they'll think you're psychic when you walk up and you say, how many of your kids have asthma? And they go, both of them. How did you know? You live within a mile of coal ash plant. Or you go to the local grocery, which is not like Harris Teeter. It's sort of a over-glorified convenience store. And everybody in the community hangs out. And they start talking, and they hear you talking about, well, my aunt has a brain tumor. And my friend's little sister, she's got a growth on her spleen. They don't know where it came from. And there was a lady who brought me a notebook full of 2.5 columns. The first column and a half are people who've died in the last 8 years in that community from some form of cancer. The rest of the list is still living. There was a lady that has had 3 or 4 miscarriages, and the doctors can't explain why. So to me, this is not an environmental issue. It's not a political issue. This is a human health issue. There are folks that are getting cancer. There are folks that are have neurological disorders. This isn't political. I have no game or no hat in the political arena. This is about human health. And this is about protecting our communities from a potential cancer source and something that will make them sick for years and years to come.
That's great, Amy. Thank you very much. We'll have time to ask Amy a few questions after Pricey speaks. I also want to, I was remiss and not mention, we have two other state lawmakers with us today. Senator Mike Woodard is with us, joined us today. Representative Becky Turney. Thank you both for being here. Representative Harrison.
Thanks, and thank you for that kind introduction. I'm not sure I deserved it. And thank you all for coming. This is an issue I've been living and eating and breathing since the Kingston spill in 2008. And I've often felt like Don Quixote, and I'm sorry it took a spill to get action out of our state, but it really was the Kingston spill that drew my attention to the problems in North Carolina. So in 2008, that spill released more than 1 billion gallons of toxic coal ash and contaminated water into Tennessee rivers, and that's 5 times the size of the BP spill and 100 times the size of Exxon Valdez. And I understand from talking to a reporter yesterday, actually, that still has not precipitated any action in Tennessee to strengthen their coal ash regulations, which I found astounding. But it did, I think, spark the EPA to renew its pledge to do something about coal ash. But unfortunately, there's been tremendous industry pushback, which is what I've found in trying to do something at the state level. So I worked with a number of environmental groups, including Appalachian Voices and SCLC and Earth Justice and Sierra Club, to try and put together what would be a model bill to regulate coal ash back in 2009. And I tried to ask my colleagues around the country if any of them had a model bill, and it turns out no state really has a perfect program for managing toxic coal ash. So we did ours from whole cloth, and we had a pretty good plan, and got the bill filed. My party was in charge of the chamber, and good people chairing the committees, and I thought at least we had an ERC, Environmental Review Commission meeting in January right after the Kingston spill, and it was the first time we'd actually talked about coal ash in the legislature. And we were promised that we'd have future meetings to consider what we needed to do to strengthen our legislation, our laws, our regulations on coal ash, and that never happened. I filed my bill, and Mike and Becky have been great on this issue. Mike was not there at the time, but I filed my bill, and I thought, well, at least we'll get a study, because these are complicated issues. 50 minutes is not a lot of time to decide what kind of legislation will work on something so complicated and public health implications. And so I thought we'd at least get a study or a hearing on that. And the industry just pushed back tremendously and told my colleagues that this was going to raise everybody's electricity rates, and we just couldn't be doing that. And my reaction is sort of like, it's okay to poison North Carolinians because we don't want the electricity rates to go up. That's just, I don't want to live in that world. But that really was the reaction. So we, and I was sort of astounded. Amy didn't talk about this, but it's not just the coal ash ponds. This stuff is being used on road beds to melt ice. It's being used in construction sites to fill holes. And we don't know that the toxins remain inert, and that stuff's leaching in our groundwater all over the state. And I think that was part of the problem, and the pushback on the EPA was that there's a whole industry that has grown up around reusing coal ash, and particularly concrete, but in drywall. I understand it's in toothpaste. I haven't figured out what brand that's in, but so it's just really important that that we understand the public health impacts of this stuff before we start using it. And I think that the problem with the EPA is their proposal was, and some of you all may know better this than I, but their proposal was twofold. One, to either classify coal ash as hazardous or as sort of regular household waste. Obviously, public health advocates, environmental advocates have been pushing the hazard designation, but if that were to be the case, then it would just undo the whole beneficial use recycling coal ash industry, and they are tremendously powerful, as I've been finding out. So, I mean, I think the EPA is in a little bit of a bind because I think they want to do the right thing, but they're facing tremendous pressure and from industry. And the GOP in charge of Congress on the House side has been trying to undermine EPA's authority to regulate in all kinds of areas, including carbon regulations, but particularly with regard to coal ash and fracking. And so I think that EPA is a little bit skittish about what they can get away with. It doesn't come back with a massive reverberation from Congress, and I can sort of sympathize with that, but it's very frustrating because this is a ticking time bomb, and it's a real human health hazard, and we ought to be doing something about it. So a year ago, I was invited by Henry Waxman's staff to testify on Capitol Hill. Because there were a couple of coal ash bills, and there was just this pressure, as I mentioned, in the House side to just leave it to the states to regulate. So I was on this panel that had been set up with 5 people who were like the dean or secretary, the head of the dean or secretary association, and water quality administrators, and several sort of states can do this, and then there was me to talk about why states couldn't do it. And I did some investigation. And really, it's not well regulated in any state. And I was trying to make the case that this is something that the states really need some federal guidance on. So we are desperate for EPA to issue some regulations in December that will do something that will provide a floor. And many of you all know this, but the context in which we operate now here in North Carolina is a legislature that is very anti-regulatory. So we've taken a number of steps backwards. Not only are we not doing anything proactive about these critical public health issues, but we're taking a number of states backwards. So in 2011-12 session, we enacted legislation and budget provision that said no state law could be stronger than federal law. We don't need federal law, we're really in trouble. Then we rolled back even more in a follow-up bill, and then we told the department this year that they had to review all their rules and justify all their rules, or they're going to be sort of automatically repealed. There are different provisions. Some that are controversial will have a review and won't be automatically repealed, but that's a real problem from a department whose budget we've cut significantly, something like 50% off of 2005-06 levels, so that we aren't even providing the adequate funding to do the jobs that they have now, and that's a big problem too. And then so we've told the department to spend a lot of time reviewing its rules, and the first set of rules that they have to review this year are the water quality rules, all the water quality wetland rules. So it's crazy that we've cut their budget, we cut the staff, now we're forcing them to justify all the rules with 9 extra staff to even understand how to go through this process. So I think it's been a real frustration for me to try and get a grip on this, and I blame my party too. But at least in that case, the Department of the Environment was very concerned about what we were doing with regard to coal ash, and they were explaining to us that there were lots of areas where we need to get involved in providing some legislative support. And the one thing we were able to do was to remove the dam safety exemption, which was just such a no-brainer. But the bill that we had proposed in 2009 would have banned these pits, required them the current ones to be cleaned up, required had set up permitting and monitoring, and to restore the dam safety exemption. And that was just a no-brainer to me, because what that meant was that the Department of the Environment had no ability to go regulate and monitor these dams, and it was up to the industry, and the industry had contracted out to engineers who would look at these dams every 5 years. So that was crazy. With North Carolina with more high hazard ponds than any state in the country, we're in the top 10 in coal ash problems, and we'd exempted them from almost all regulations. And that was the one thing we were able to do in 2010, was to remove that safety exemption. And that was how we found out that we actually had 29 high hazard ponds in our state, not 14, as had been reported by industry. And so that's been remarkable. So I don't have any great hope that we're going to do a really wonderful comprehensive coal ash bill. I'm really hopeful that the EPA comes up with something that will provide some base of federal floor, at least for some regulations at the federal level. Just the current climate at the legislature is quite anti-regulatory and seems to be ignorant of the impacts of that's the wrong word to use, but just not cognizant of the problems of the public health associated with exposing our citizens to poisons and our natural resources. So where are we now? We had our second discussion of coal ash in the 6 years since the Kingston spill at the ERC meeting last week, the Environmental Review Commission meeting last week, and I was astounded, because it's like all these legislators who were regretting all the rollbacks and House Senate Bill 781 and all these bad bills are like, wow, I wish I had known. And one thing I failed to mention was that, not only are we not doing anything about coal ash, but last year we put a provision in this terrible amended environmental laws bill that that had a specific provision that Duke had requested that allowed for the compliance boundary for coal ash ponds to be moved to the edge of the property. Now, while this is a problem, it used to be, I think, 500 feet from, and it wasn't just coal ash, it was any contaminated pond. And that meant that beyond the 500 feet, you had to be monitoring for water quality. Well, what Duke pushed for was to move that to the boundary of the property. Now, for Charlotte residents, I would be mighty concerned because that property line is the Catawba River, which feeds into Mountain Lake, which is their drinking water supply. So that meant that Duke no longer had to test on their property, and once it already contaminated the river. So, it confounded me that provision got in the bill and that it passed. But I think there are a lot of legislators who are regretting voting for that bill, and I have a feeling that might be one of the things we repeal, which I will be astounded by. But that's sort of, I think, this is a problem. Everybody at the legislature, everything's sort of in the abstract, but when you put a face to the problem about our policy weaknesses, this is what happens. I think that people start to realize. So a lot of real strong anti-regulatory folks were speaking very strongly about the need for doing something about the coal ash issue. So I'm hopeful that that's the case, because we have been told that we have a short session coming up in May. We've been told by the leadership they want us out of there by mid-June to late June. They don't want anything controversial. But this Dan River spill was in the backyard of the head of the Senate, and he came out very strongly saying the Environmental Review Commission start studying this issue now. I don't question the sincerity. If he really wants to do something, I think that it will happen, and we have the rules chair who came out like a week later saying we got to close down all these coal ash ponds, and is going to work with our environmental champion in the House, Chuck McGrady, to make that happen. So I think there was some question about at what form this would take, but I think at the very least, I think that we'll do something about that provision in House Bill 74 about the compliance boundary, because I think people now realize that was not a good idea, and I think that I think that it may be a directive to Diener to come up with a plan to close down these ponds, and hopefully to spend a little bit more time. I'm told, because it's election year and it's going to be a non-controversial short session, that we'll probably spend a little bit more time studying it after we adjourn in June, before we reconvene in January of 2015. So I think that I'm hopeful that will really happen. I've never seen leadership so public about it, and I think they're on the record as talking about what they want to do. What has been more interesting, and Chris alluded to this about, is the governor's reaction, and saying one thing and Diener says another, and then some of his advisors say another, but he's mentioned a number of times he wants to close this, so presumably we'll have the support. I think that the hammer of federal subpoenas has been a nice thing to really get their attention, and apparently they've got a lot of information they've been fed from concerned citizens who've been concerned about the lack of response by our state regulators. And so I think that the federal indictments it's not indictments yet, subpoena has gotten the attention of the McCrory administration. And as I was sort of trying to figure out the timeline about where we were on everything, that federal subpoenas, the federal grand jury convenes in March on the 18th, 19th, and 20th. Diener has indicated they're going to have a proposal for these coal ash ponds plan on the 21st. They're going to release that. But they've been saying everything from shut them down to we need to study it, and I know we're all sick of hearing we need to study that more. So it'll be interesting to see how that happens. You all know that the context of the lawsuits, that Southern Environmental Law Center, Appalachian Voices, and a number of environmental groups sued Duke over the contamination at River Bend Station in Charlotte, at the Asheville plant, and at Sutton. And the Diener came in and at the 59th day of the 60-day notice said, no, we're going to step in and do something about it in both the River Bend and the Asheville lawsuits. But then there was the Sutton one that they were about to do that, but after all the controversy and the tension, they've held off on the Sutton. And they've also indicated to the judge that they may want to revisit those settlements that only gave Duke a $99,000 fine and then no plan to clean up the coal ash pond. So I think that there's some talk about, and those were bad. And what happened also was that Diener indicated that they were going to act on all the other 14 pond sites, which precluded environmental groups from challenging the Duke ponds and the contamination that was getting into our rivers. So I think that there's been a whole lot of reassessing where they were before the spill brought a lot of national attention to our lack of public health protections in North Carolina for exposure to these poisons. So I'm sorry I'm not 100%, so my brain's a little foggy, but I think that I'm hopeful that we're going to have some action, and I'm hopeful that that we'll get a little bit in the short session and maybe a lot more in the long session, because we do have some leadership in the House and the Senate that seem to be committed to doing something about this. So I appreciate y'all's advocacy on this, because if it weren't for the environmentalists and the advocates testing the water and showing us all these contaminants, I mean the deformed fish in Sutton Lake that subsistence fishermen are eating, and ground and individuals living out depending on groundwater, private wells that are super contaminated from this coal ash, and that's a problem all over our state. This is just inexcusable, and we have to do something about it. So I appreciate y'all's advocacy, because we're going to need it come whenever we reconvene in May, I guess, and in January if we're going to have something else. So thank you for having me.
I know we'll have a lot of questions, and so I want to give you an opportunity. I recognize it's 1 o'clock, so we'll try to not go on too long. I do want to call your attention, however, not to pile on Duke, but our organization, we're a part of the North Carolina Justice Center, is also home to a project called the North Carolina Budget and Tax Center, which released a report, co-released a report yesterday that was highlighted on the front page, I think, of the Charlotte Observer this morning, along with some groups at the national level, that documented that Duke is one of the top 20 or so top tax scofflaws in the country, paid literally no federal income tax from 2008 to 2012. So when the plea comes for us to pay for the cleanup, it may be an interesting part of the debate to discuss Duke's profits and the compensation packages for some of its executives.
The South Carolina Environmental Agency chose not to intervene. They chose not to step in. They let the lawsuits go forward with the advocacy groups. They were able to get, it actually turned out to be, folks talk about a win-win. Well, this one turned out to be a win-win-win because some of the coal ash is being recycled, so the recyclers were happy. The coal ash is getting moved away from the water sources, and it's getting moved to lined landfills, the part that's not being recycled. So the environmentalists were happy, and the industry eliminated a huge risk for its company and was able to make money at the recycling. So it was a win all the way around in South Carolina. Unfortunately, we haven't had that much luck in North Carolina with this with the lawsuits.
Sarah, do you have a question? No.
Sarah Vasco, Policy Watch. Just a quick question. I'm curious about what people with community wells, their own well systems near the river being told, and whether y'all have looked at that, and whether there's additional concerns that those people have.
Sarah Vasco, who's our investigative reporter at NC Policy Watch, asking about what are the people with the wells near these sites being told. Is that the question? Am I right?
Yeah, people with their own well systems.
Yeah. What are they being told by?
Do you know?
I know that.
Well, Mike answer.
Oh, go ahead. You know me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Senator Wood.
Yeah. I represent Caswell County, which is downstream from Danville, and so I have 2 municipal water systems that run off of wells. So, and I watched the presentation by EPA and DENR officials in Danville that occurred the week after the spill. What they're telling folks, and I asked this question at the EMC last week as well, or EMR, whatever it was, ERC, as well. So what our DENR is saying, what Virginia DENR is saying, is that wells are generally safe because they're deep enough and they're generally far enough away. This was a question at the Danville presentation because there are a lot of folks downstream of the river before and after Danville on the Virginia side, and of course I care about my small little poor rural county up there it's not just the 2 municipal water systems there, but it's all the folks running. So they're telling us that the wells are going to be safe.
Do you believe them?
No.
Do they test for things like arsenic and selenium? Is that how they determine?
Yeah. And at my request, and you can see there's a map where they're doing test sites, and they were doing them, I guess, just beyond, before you get to Danville, just beyond Danville, and then doing them further down as you get closer to Carr Lake. They placed, our deaners placed a test site in the little town of Milton, since that is one of the municipal sites that runs off a well and is closest to the Dan River on the Castle County side. So they've started testing in Milton. So they haven't seen elevated or unsafe levels by their definition yet. But what happens as the stuff sits there for a while, if they dredge, I mean, you can go on and on. Is that what you all are hearing too? Is that they're telling folks not to worry, you'll be okay.
And if I can just add, you know, in one of our many rollbacks, we had added a provision a couple of years ago that required, because y'all might remember the Governor Easley, we had a big water that would drown. We had 2.5 million North Carolinians drinking out of private wells, and we weren't testing it at all. And so we added a bunch of testing provisions, but it didn't include any of the heavy metals or volatile organic compounds. And so we added a provision that would test, because this would be beyond just the spill, but those impacted by living near these coal ash ponds. We added a provision that would require testing of these known carcinogens and neurotoxicants for those individuals near these sources, and that was repealed last year. So.
In the back.
I have two questions, one for Amy and one for Representative Harrison. So you were talking about they recycle, and can't they make stuff out of this? Why aren't they doing that? And then two, Representative Harrison, I love your optimism that Senator Berger is going to do something about this, but I'm curious how much Duke Energy has donated to him, and can we get some sort of table to see, you know, what Duke Energy has donated to each of these leaders? And Speaker Tillis is running for Senate. Yeah. Are they really going to do anything with the money behind them?
And I should talk about that, because I always do whenever I'm talking about any kind of energy-related legislation. Nothing happens in the legislature that if Duke Energy is impacted, that they don't want to happen. So, and they are remarkably influential, and it's both because they know that we all have constituents who pay for electricity, and they couch it in the form of it will raise their rates. So it's but and I think that Democracy in North Carolina has done a great analysis. They issued a report that showed something like $435,000 went last year in campaign contributions to my colleagues, predominantly Republicans, and then they also, I think, concluded that nearly $1 million had gone to McCrory since his 2008 election. And you can't deny the influence of campaign contributions. I remember talking to a colleague from the western part of the states during the Clean Smokestacks debate, and he told me, well, you know, Duke is writing me $4,000 checks, and the environmentalists aren't writing me any checks, and who am I going to side with? And he had a glass of wine. He was probably a little more candid than he should have been. But I was like, wow, I hadn't joined the legislature yet, but I was pretty astounded. But that's the problem with our legislature and policy in general. And unfortunately, we just undid a lot of those campaign reforms that we had in place to protect us and need more. But so that's where we are. I think Democracy in North Carolina is staying on top of this. And the recycling, I'm less sanguine about that, because I think there are some problems associated with recycling this coal ash. We don't know that those toxins stay inert. So, I mean, we had that whole Chinese drywall problem where people were getting sick from their drywall because they had this toxic coal ash in it a couple of years ago. And I had a concrete manufacturer from Salisbury come see me while I was trying to run these coal ash bills, telling me how concerned he was that we were using recycled coal ash in concrete. So you're the biologist. I didn't have much science in college, but you know, this is a problem. There's a lot of 140 million tons, is that what you said, every year? And we told them to clean up the emissions, so it's getting more toxic, the stuff that's remaining. So, I mean, it's a problem. We got to figure it out. Well, I know the solution. We can move away from coal in general. And that's what, in the latest version of my coal ash bill would have done that, because we've been limited to the number of bills that we can file to 10, so I had to pull all my coal provisions into one bill. One would have taken mountaintop removal coal out of our power plants and fixed coal ash, and then banned new coal-fired power plants and divested our treasury of coal stocks. But obviously that did not go anywhere. But anyway, I think the solution is ultimately weaning ourselves off coal.
Amy, go ahead.
I wanted to invite, I know we're running out of time, at Wake Forest University in Winston tomorrow evening at 5:30. They are having an open public event called Heartbreak on the Dan, the coal ash problem in North Carolina. It's a free event, and Greensboro's own singer-songwriter Lauren Dossett is going to be there. So it's free for the public, so if you're in the area or interested in coming and getting some more information about the coal ash in North Carolina and hearing a free concert, please come and join us.
appropriate to publicize that. Sir, over here in my right.
Thank you. If you're not 100% today, gracious, what would happen if you'd be 100%? I'm Charles Robbins. I work with the Cape Fear River Watch in Wilmington, and I was part of the collecting of the fish in Sutton Lake, and that whole problem down there. You mentioned earlier what's being done with the local wells. It's different in certain places, but Duke had our Cape Fear Public Utility Authority sign a contract recently to forever not to drill a well within a 17-mile radius of Sutton Lake. And Fleming is part of that. It's a combination of things, but when a local municipality will sign a contract forever with anybody, you know it's a problem, and this is political. So I think the first thing to do is to go to the governor's manager and turn the water off at the meter and see how he does without water. We work on water quality quite a bit, and about 8 years ago, the guy with, one of the people with CP&L told us that they were going to bring in coal ash to Sutton Lake area to store it. There's 130 acres there now, and Doug Springer was the river keeper at that time. He said, "I'll put your name in lights." And the guy was about to retire, so that sort of went by the way. But I've tried to get to the health department. It seems like the Diener had mentioned in the meeting a week or two ago that they didn't give warnings to the local people about drinking water. It was up to the local health department to do that. The local health department is controlled by the local county commissioners. The county commissioners, we've been fighting with the Titan situation for years now, can't seem to respond without the county commissioner's response, and then so it is political at the top, but the water, groundwater situation is imminent where we live because it's so high, and it's hard to get anybody to address it. I mean, what do you have to do? Is it an Arab Spring about to have to happen for something like this to work out? Do we have to surpass what Greenpeace is doing? Do we have to climb aboard the ship? What do we have to do? You can't carry on like this for so long. I mean, people are dying every day, and we just have to go to the polls again and do something. But drinking water. Good luck. Thank you.
Any other questions? One last one. Right here. Yes.
Okay. A concern that just popped into my head is that you were talking about recycled uses of this coal ash. And did I hear that it's used as slag on roads? And is that something that we should be even more concerned about given the quality of the winter we've had this year? Is that what we're putting on our roads so that we can drive in inclement weather?
And I need to double check on that. I was told we were using it in road beds for the sort of structure, and I know that they use it in West Virginia and Ohio to melt the snow. Yeah, that's a big concern because it just runs off into the water, and I'll double check on that. But I'm not sure we're using it to melt snow here. They are using it in West Virginia.
Something weird on the roads.
Yeah. And interestingly, at the Asheville airport, I had used a big chunk of the coal ash from the plant there to reconstruct the Asheville runway and to fill in a big hole right next to the French Broad River. Yeah. So.
Maybe one more question.
I just want to take 1 minute and make a comment. This involves two matters relative to clean water. One is the Titan proposition in Wilmington, which would shower toxins and all kinds of stuff into the Cape Fear, which is already an impaired river. So anything we can do to stop Titan, we should be doing it. The second thing is relative to fracking. Diener held 3 hearings, and I attended 2 of them. And the 2 I attended, the vast majority of people were opposed to fracking. And this is actually a picture of me asking the question of how many people were opposed to fracking. 190 hands out of 200 people went up in the air. What did Diener do? They said that fracking can be done if it's done safely.
Right.
What they do relative to Titan, they gave them an air permit. You know, the more we do and the more I hear about their presentation, which is really good, reminds me of a movie that I saw back a long time ago called Network. And in that movie, this broadcaster said, we're mad as Hades and we're not going to take it anymore. And we need to do everything we can for the sake of the future of our children and future generations, because just in all these sources, ash, Titan, fracking, it's almost like we're trying to destroy our water. And our kids and grandkids deserve better than that.
Thank you very much. Bob and Katie, it's March 5th. What time again is the event next week? There you go.
Oh,
4:45.
4:45 in front of the governor's
I'll
mansion.
send you the website.
www.comecleanmcrory.com is the website. There's a petition there. March 5th in front of the governor's mansion, 4:45 p.m. Wear blue. Thank you, Rob.
There are also hearings on the 3rd at the Utility Commission, Duke's IPR, at 6:30, I think.
Okay, March 3rd. And I see a hand. Okay, one last question.
I just want to let you know that ground swell rising is going to be shown at the Rialto Theater on April the 6th at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And we are looking for sponsors for that. The movie is free, it's nonprofit, but you know, the producer of it has got to get some money, and we got printing to do and all that. So if anyone would like to come to that film, mark your calendars, we'll get information out to everybody. But that's a great, great film to see. Ground Well Rising. Ground Swell Rising.
Ground Swell Rising. Rialto Theater in Rome. Folks, thank you very much for coming. Join me again in thanking our Our next crucial conversation will be March 26th. We have Dean Baker, the nationally acclaimed progressive economist, will be in Raleigh to speak, so stay tuned.